Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, Mysterious Voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, it is Short Story Tuesday, a wonderful day to talk about all the short form literature that exists in the world. And today I wanted to focus on a short story about Vietnamese immigrants and an unusual woman who comes into these immigrants' lives. I am referring to The War Years by Viet Thanh Nguyen, coming from his 2017 collection, The Refugees. For those who don't know, Viet Thanh Nguyen is a Vietnamese writer. I don't think I've talked about Vietnam or Vietnamese writers on this channel before. I might have for some poetry thing, but I'm not 100% sure on that. He has written short stories, nonfiction, and fictional novels that all have the common theme of Vietnam. His, I think it was his 2016 book, The Sympathizer, actually won the Pulitzer Prize. So that's a pretty big deal, I feel I can say. I haven't read it, but based on its description, it does seem to be pretty unusual, and I would love to absolutely check it out. It does seem to be that a lot of the themes of his work seem to be that of frustration with the Vietnamese communist and more sympathy towards the South Vietnam, which was the non-communist side. So it seems like he was on, the other side of things. But I don't know enough about that conflict to really say that the communists were in the right or not. But I do know that the South Vietnam was assisted by the French, who lost, and then the Americans, who also lost. So for the imperialists to be on the side of South Vietnam, that strikes me as a bit suspicious. But I won't, offer any more commentary on that. A fairly interesting author. I will definitely, not at the end of this year, but in 2022, I'll probably be reading The Sympathizer just because it does sound fascinating, and it won the Pulitzer, so maybe it's good. That remains to be seen. So without further ado, let's talk about The War Years. I will do a summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. So The War Years focuses on a teenage immigrant. He might have been born in the country. It's not 100% specified, but his name is, I believe it's long. It's only mentioned like once throughout the story. He lives in the San Jose region of California, not too far away from where I live right now. His parents own a Vietnamese market. They are immigrants, and I'd say fairly recent at the time of this story because it's like 1983, and they immigrated maybe sometime in the 70s. So they own the Vietnamese market. They're trying to impart, wisdom upon their child, but he's at a point where he's engaging in a little teenage rebellion. He's questioning whether his mother is always correct, asking his father for perhaps an allowance, which his father says no to. And he's also questioning why they even bother putting price tags on food at the market, because all the customers end up haggling anyways, to which the mom responds that she wants to teach her son, the value of questioning, the value of certain items and getting your money's worth in that regard. So one day, a woman named Mrs. Hoa comes into the market and starts talking about, how there's still a fight against the communists in Vietnam, even though the war has kind of been over for a little bit at this point, although she asserts that guerrilla fighters are still fighting it. And she asks the mom for some money in order to keep funding the fight against the communists. The mom views the war as over, so she sees this kind of pointless. But it does seem like Mrs. Hoa knows a bit about their family and might be like threatening them or like bribing or like extorting them for money in order to get them to donate to this political cause. At one point, the mom even follows Mrs. Hoa home in order to see where she lives, and it does seem like she lives in a rundown house in a sort of not so great neighborhood. So like even though Mrs. Hoa is asking for this money, she's not using it for herself, it seems, in this story. Finally, Mrs. Hoa approaches the mom again and asks for money. And the mom says, no, I'm not going to give it to you. The war is over at this point. And Mrs. Hoa is like, do you see this woman? Because they're in the Vietnamese market. And she's like, she doesn't believe in the cause. She might as well be a communist if she's not going to support us. And it seems like the Vietnamese store goers, customers, like take that to heart because they start telling people in the community, oh, she must be a communist sympathizer. And finally, the mom gives in and goes to Mrs. Hoa's house with Long, her son. And it's there that she discovers that Mrs. Hoa's sons and husband were kind of lost at many points during the Vietnamese War, whether it be for the French or for when the CIA was putting people into Cambodia or Thailand at first. It seems like Mrs. Hoa lost a lot of people, and she actually seems to be using this money to either help herself like get up in the world, especially being a new immigrant, or she's sending it back to Vietnam to fund these rebels against the communist government. And so finally the mom just decides to give her $200, and she's like, that's all I can give you. This is yours now. Let's be done with it. And so they decide to go home, but before they go home, the story ends with the mom taking the son to 7-Eleven and giving him $5 to go spend in buying whatever he wants. And the story ends with him in the candy aisle trying to decide what he wants the most. In terms of analysis, there's a bit to talk about with this story. One thing that Nguyen talks about with this story is generational differences when it comes to immigrants. So Long is quite different from his parents. He loves reading comic books. He watches TV, whereas his parents might not do that. He has no memories of Vietnam. That seems to be the major difference between his parents and him, because the parents are always talking about the famine that took place in Vietnam. They're talking about having to bribe a general to exclude the father from a draft for the Vietnam War. There was a lot of struggle in the parents' life. And I do like how Tan draws attention to how easy the son has it compared to the parents' upbringing in Vietnam. And because they talk about famine, but they Long spends all of his time in a grocery store and doesn't seem to be going hungry. So that's one major difference between him and his parents. His parents have gone through so many struggles, and it does seem like the parents are trying to impart some of their hard-fought wisdom upon their child, although he seems to be resistant. And I feel like there's a good quote that illustrates the major difference between the child and the parents. They're just going to ask for a lower price. I was 13, beginning to be brave enough to say what I always suspected for a while, that my mother wasn't always right. Why do they haggle over everything? Why can't they just pay the price that's there? Are you going to be the kind of person who always pays the asking price, my mother demanded, or the kind who fights to find out what something's really worth? And I really like that quote, because in Vietnam, the parents had to do a lot of haggling to pay for things and not get cheated out of some sort of deal. But the son who lives in America has always probably paid sticker price and has never questioned whether something is actually worth what it says he is, or what he says it is. He takes a lot of things at face value, and maybe that's applying to the grand scheme of things too. Is the son, the author notes that Tan notes that that the son reads a lot of newspaper articles and is kind of influenced by that, even though this is Reagan's America, and so he believes that Reagan is fighting the communists, and he takes it at face value. But if you look deeper and tried to see more than what was there, he might find the reality of what's going on in America. Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions and seeing something that isn't actually there, but I think it can apply. But I feel like this quote right here shows the big generational differences that exist among immigrants, where Long doesn't have very many memories of Vietnam, but his parents, that was their big experience, and I really like how Nguyen calls attention to this. It's really good writing on his part. Another interesting element of this story is that of attempting to make a new life, as you see with multiple stories of immigrants, how they try to make a new life. I recently talked about Children of the Land by Marcelo Hernandez Castillo, which I thought was an amazing, a pretty good story. But you saw the generational differences between, Marcelo's parents, who had always lived in Mexico, and Marcelo himself, who struggled to understand once he moved to America. And you find the same thing here with the question of, can you make a new life? And that story, maybe, but the immigration system was troubling. And I think there is a problem here. Because although the parents do have a new church, they go to a new church, they own their own market, which they probably didn't do in Vietnam, and they have a decent life where they're not struggling with famine or really living in poverty, where they're trying to find ways to make ends meet. There's this new sense of life right here. But the thing that's preventing them from fully acclimating, fully assimilating into this new culture is their past, which in this case is Mrs. Hoa. She seems to be a representation of that Vietnamese past, because one, she's standing there asking for money for a war that seems to be over. She's preventing them from moving on from that Vietnamese past. So it does seem like, whereas with Marcelo Hernandez, the issue was the immigration system prevented him from being seen as an American. In this case, it's really the memories of Vietnam itself that prevent them from being seen as American. Because when they go to Mrs. Hoa's house, they're reminded of the people who died, Mrs. Hoa's husband and sons who died in the war, and they see sewing machines scattered about. So some of the work that was done in Vietnam, such as sewing and whatnot, really illustrating how maybe you can't escape from the past. And I think maybe Nguyen is trying to argue that there's a need to remember, because although Long's mom wants to fight giving Mrs. Hoa money, she ultimately decides to do it. And I think that's a tacit admission that although she wants to escape from her Vietnamese past, it's always going to be there. And you're always going to remember, why you left Vietnam for America. And you're going to want to remember, the people who are still there, who are still fighting to make the country a little better. So it seems like you can't exactly make a new life, as an immigrant, at least if you're Vietnamese. And I really like how authors explore that. Nguyen here, but also Hernandez Castillo in his story, and how there's two different reasons why you can't quite escape from your past. With one being a terrible bureaucracy, and another one being people who are constantly reminding you that past exists. And if you forget about it, maybe you lose a part of yourself, a part of your own culture. And so even though I like this story, one issue that I found with it was this weird messaging about communist. Nguyen paints the communist as really bad, and they might have done a lot of bad things. But the issue here that I find is that Nguyen also brings up the the American and the French governments in this story. And if you recall your history, these governments were very imperialistic. They prolonged the Vietnam War for as long as possible in order to prevent the establishment of communism in Southeast Asia. And so it seems really weird to be angry at the communist when the real problem is America and France. And maybe to some extent Nguyen knows this because he mentions it throughout the story, but at the same time it seems like he's trying to paint the communists as the supreme bad individuals in this story. So just some unusual messaging that that might be more related to culture than anything else. So perhaps I have to be in the mindset. I have to be Vietnamese before I can understand what he's getting at here. Still something important to consider as you read this. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The War Years by Viet Thanh Nguyen. A pretty good short story, much better than the one that I read last week from American Masculine. Just dreadful. But this one was pretty good. A real page turner, and a lot of fun to read. I do want to seek out more work from Viet Thanh Nguyen, as I do think he has a lot of interesting things to say about the Vietnamese culture and the differences between being, an American immigrant and holding on to your Vietnamese past. So look out for more work that I'm going to check out from him. I will definitely recommend that you read this. This is a recommendation from me over here. If you read this before or you simply want to comment on something I said, do so below. I would love to have a discussion with you about The War Years. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this author if they don't already know about him. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and teenage rebellion-y travels. Farewell.